Well, question is, why do we even begin exploring this topic of business executives requiring this help or assistance? Well, there are so many posts out there and articles in the Forbes magazine and any other magazines. They keep talking about the, humility and empathy and values and integrity and ethics of that are needed by business executives. But is it really the case? Because if we look at this much closer, I have spoken to many of them, and they don't really feel like they need to embrace any of this, any of those humane qualities to begin with. They're quite functional in their world, where they need to stay and stick to a very specific set of principles, and it's a bit mechanistic, but that's how you stay within the brotherhood, so to speak. So therefore, bringing up this whole issue for them is ludicrous. Yes, you work hard, you play hard. That's what they understand, because that's easy to to compute. But at the same time, like making some spiritual gurus out of business executives, that's a bit of a stretch. Maybe it's not worth even going down there. However, we do know that a lot of quite successful executives and CEOs do meditate on a regular basis. I don't know much about the, practice of mindfulness or yoga. It reminds me, we had a very interesting, colorful character a long time ago in Russia. He was the owner of the Uralsib Bank, Nikolai Tsvetkov, who studied out very well. At some point he was valued, I think, about $8 billion. But then he embraced a lot of esoteric teachings, and he really started like splurging money on that, inviting a lot of questionable gurus, and making sure his executives and top management go through specific enlightening trainings and stuff like that. He would be always talking on the value of like fasting and being a vegetarian and doing yoga and stuff like that. Well, in the long run, basically his empire, fell apart and was valued, roughly, $200-300 million. Is it just because of this sort of like enlightenment and the old esoteric teachings? It's a bit of a challenging issue, because at that point in time, the core of his team left, just because they didn't want to like really do that crazy stuff, and they wanted to focus on business. So he parted with them, and these guys went on and were quite successful in other things. So there's definitely an overkill. But let's talk about Russia. As an example, it starts with Mr. Putin, who paid a visit to this Mount Athos, where the lots of Greek Orthodox churches are, and then someone clever enough and close to him, a guy by name Poltavchenko, he started this Athos Brotherhood. Because you see, the whole idea is like loyalty is one thing, but if this sort of a loyalty to the top guy, is glued with something, higher than that, because it's easy, to say that, oh, everyone needs to be like Russian Orthodox, because at that time, it's the mainstream sort of like religion. So therefore, it doesn't really count. It was very easy to be part of that. But apparently someone close to him, because not only that guy, but there were other guys close within the inner circle of Mr. Putin, they thought, well, we need to actually look for an extra source of enlightenment to make sure that if we put, other people through, this is a bit of a guarantee that they would stay loyal, not just because they started like, fearing God or something, repercussions. No, just because, that would be a way or a test to see who passes through, and whether it's a divine message, or whether it's a way to keep them together. Actually, I think it was more or less like a stab at creating like a masonry of sorts, because all of these guys who would go, all these dignitaries that would, hop on the plane and go to this Mount Athos, they would get their Kombuskini, bracelets and everything, and they would be, talking to some monks and establishing some sort of like relationship with them to demonstrate that they were pious. Or actually more than that. There's an underlying issue. It's not just like going there for the, some religious purposes. The whole point behind that was actually more like that phenomenon of the, place of power, because those people I talked to, who went there and came back, some were like really exalted and a bit of like experienced a bit of like religious awakening, and some of them did experience like the moment you get on step on the ground, you do feel vibrations of sorts. So that was actually a way to make sure that people once they experience the vibrations of the place of power, that changes them. And that was also a guarantee that, well, if you do that, then you sort of like create a new, maybe not the cult, but like following that's forged not just through talking about religious, but through some experiences. Because a lot of these people came back, they were like real devout, Orthodox believers. Although one of my clients who went there, who was a CFO of a very large oil and gas company, he didn't experience any of that. He did, though, take trips to other, places of power around the world, very expensive trips, and he came back and he was aware of the kind of high vibrations from those places. So he was actually willing to explore that more. And that's how I came up with that idea that actually it does play a role in the transformation, because at some point trips to the Altai region with all these mountains that were known as one of the more powerful places of power in Russia, a lot of business people would pack into a bus and go there and walk across the plains to those places of power and come back some, sort of like really transformed, whatever transformation was meant to them, and however long it lasted, it's a different story. But this is just an example from Russia. Yes, it did play a role for a lot of people, because being part of some secret societies, it's not really much of an achievement, especially if it's almost like everyone around them could get in if you have the money and you have some sort of a title or a position in the pecking order. So it didn't really provide that level of relief or deliverance sought by people. Most of them must have had that bad conscience, and even like Russian oligarchs, especially of the Jewish descent, they would pay tribute and walk across the desert, just to sort of like do that gig to demonstrate that they also want to be seen as enlightened ones. So, and another recent development was quite funny. I was just shared it with some of my friends. I said, like, when the word conscious came about, and that it was rather popular, and a lot of people try to call themselves like conscious business people, then somebody clever enough started a club of conscious business people in Moscow, where you would see familiar faces of all those oligarchs and kind of thuggish looking millionaires. So it was interesting, like people would jump at an opportunity to sort of like relabel themselves, not really seeking some sort of like enlightenment. Although even Mr. Putin, just less than a few weeks ago, he went to the Tuva region, to undergo some shamanic ritual of sorts, maybe just to stay in power. But that was all over the news. I mean, not as directly described as that, but people kind of implied that in their articles. So yeah, I mean, like sort of esoteric plays a big role, and as some of the known speakers in like social media in Russia, they talk a lot about that that a lot of people in power actually find it very attractive to embrace some magic or esoteric practices as a sort of an assurance that they would stay in power, stay in place. So whatever it takes. Well, technically speaking, with so much money, they could have bought themselves, several gurus. Like at one point, one of the leading banks, like Sberbank, did, when they invited Sadhguru, and even created a university under his name, for some spiritual training and teachings, paid him a handsome amount of money. So yeah, so there's a concoction of that. But I'm actually talking more about whether personal enlightenment plays a role in the corporate life in terms of bringing some intrinsic value to employees and companies and shoring up the corporate culture, among other things. Well, we all heard about the CEO activism. I will not mention those names again, but that people who try to do that, it's always a treacherous ground, because something you say could be construed and perceived differently. So in relation to my project, what I'm trying to say is that my approach to that is a bit different. I'm thinking mainly about the quality of decision making, that is one of those main features. When people go through the kind of a like detox thing, through the certain transformation, they are able to look at things from a different perspective, and it's no longer just having something that changed in their head. No, it's mainly getting the right type of clarity that allows them to take decisions and act and treat people around them differently. Well, I'm sure that's a good investment, because it's not like we're talking about people who suddenly develop that religious zeal, and of course that affects everyone in a rather negative fashion. I'm talking about something totally secular and devoid of any esoteric meaning. So this is what our project is all about, being totally secular, transparent, and having nothing to do with any esoteric practices. So whether it's going to work and take hold, it remains to be seen, but it would be nice to explore that, because in this area there's actually no one doing that. Well, I'm saying that there could be people who may try in a very similar fashion do something, but then they've got a huge agenda attached, whereas I don't have any strings attached to my T-Bay project, because it's so transparent, and I'm not driving it, I'm just triggering the process. So it will be interesting to see how it will unfold, and whether it actually has a lot of value for people, because people are different, and some people I have worked with discovered different qualities, and I cannot say that it will be across the board exactly the same outcome, just because it's all about what's inside of a person. I am not bringing in anything from the outside. I'm not doing anything to the person. I'm just, switching the lights on, or maybe off, for the process to take its course. So we'll see how it will unfold, and I will be sharing with you my observations. So stay tuned.